for your life. I mean, you understand what I'm asking with that, right? Like if there's going to be a play, you've got the actors with narrative scripts that they have to say, and it all works together to tell a story for a purpose. But in order for all those things to happen, you have to have a stage that is set with the right props, right? In order for the narrative to accomplish what it's meant to. Our lives are very much like that. How is God setting the stage, maybe not in your life, but setting the stage in people's lives? Let's not make it so personal. That way maybe I'll get somebody to actually answer the question. How does God set the stage for our lives? Dawn.
I think it's a hard question to answer because I feel like in hindsight you see how he set the stage, but I don't know that I could answer how he's setting it now for future things.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
Sure.
I look past in my life and I see lots of setting stages, like stuff that you would never
Yeah.
imagine. And then you see the connection after the fact and you're like, wow,
Yeah.
I could have done it better. You know what I mean? Like, it's amazing.
Yeah.
But
Great point.
I don't know that you can, I don't know. I don't know if you can see it
Yeah.
now for what's future.
The specifics are tough.
Well, I also think that the way you think it's supposed to go,
Yeah.
doesn't.
What? No, you're right. You're right. The things that happen in life does not happen in hardly ever in any way that we thought it was going to. Life just, very few people at the end of their lives actually accomplish everything they set out to do. That was a joke. But anyways, I don't know if you, I didn't know, okay, it was just that bad. It wasn't that you didn't hear it. All right, it's just that bad. But am I right? I mean, you're right, though. It's for you to sit back and look at your life and say, this is what God is doing, this is how he's going to get me there, and this is what it's going to look like when we don't know any of those. It's true. Are there general things that have to be in, that God tends to put in place in people's lives, though, to set the stage? What are some general things? Yeah, trials. We don't like them, and we don't like the fact that he does, but certainly trials, because it makes you turn in directions that he wants you to go that we wouldn't otherwise know he wants this direction to go in. Yeah. Mariko, you see? Even non-Christians, yeah. 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 Good. George.
I'll give you an example. We were at Patty's father's yesterday. He had a tree from the neighbor's yard overgrowing into his, and we had to cut branches and break them up and whatnot. And there's a woman who lives on the street. She's a couple years older than Patty and I. Her name's Judy. As a matter of fact, she was at the concert on Friday. We were talking with her. She's a believer, and she's been helping with Patty's father. So we were talking with her yesterday. She was outside when we were leaving. And we were talking about, and she's like 62, she has grandkids, and she works for the Red Cross, and she's had a very heavy schedule lately, getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning and working 65 hours a day, and she's exhausted. And I said to her, I said, when you were younger and raising kids, did you ever think that it would be more to do when you got older? And she said, no. She said, I'm doing more now than when I was 35. And I said, we said the same thing because there's always, and you don't, I don't know how I'm going to say this. You have this idea of how things are going to go. You know, you have plans. Oh, I'm going to have grandchildren someday. But God puts stuff in your life. Like we've gone from taking care of Patty's grandmother to taking care of her stepmother to her father to my father. And my mom is going to be 88. She's needing help now with a lot of things. think about that stuff 25 years ago.
Yeah.
But that's what God, that's kind of like the fabric of the life, what your life becomes. It's what, if you're one of God's children, this you should embrace it, first of all, that you can help so many people. But you have this idea for your life and what it should be, and God has a better idea.
Yeah.
Has a better way. And all the people that you come in contact with, whether they be family, whether they be neighbors, we didn't know this woman Judy before 6 months ago, and I would happen to be starting my father-in-law's car. When we go every week, I run his car because he doesn't use it anymore. He can't drive, but just to keep the battery up. And she came and started talking to me, and her license plate on her car says One Faith. So we knew she was a believer. And she said, "I'd like to help with your father-in-law."
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You just don't know. And
Yeah.
that's kind of the great thing about the life that God gives us. You don't know.
Yeah.
You plan and you scheme and you think you plan. Yeah, and it just changes constantly.
We went one time to Sight and Sound. I've only been there once. And I kind of relate it to that. You walk in and, and you sit down in this theater, this live theater over in Lancaster, depending upon where you're from.
Lancaster.
I know it's Lancaster, but, some people get it wrong. It's all right. I didn't want to hurt anybody's feelings, Now I have. No. And you sit in the auditorium and you look at this elaborate stage that is almost like it is three-dimensional, literally, but it's 360 degrees almost. It almost engulfs you. It's on this side, it's across the front, it's on this side, and you kind of go, especially if you know the Bible, you know what story you're going to watch, and you kind of have an idea of what the story is going to be, and you look at yourself and you think, how in the world does all of this stuff, number one, fit the story? Secondly, how in the world are they going to move from one place to the other and allow those settings to actually fit the story and communicate it? And then you get to the end and you think to yourself, how could I have not seen that? It just brings it to life. And I think that's what God does to us. He sets this stage that we couldn't imagine. We can't dream it up. We don't know what's coming, and we don't know what the end is going to look like. But He sets the stage in such a way that once we walk through it, it brings so much more understanding to His plan. It is.
Pulls back the curtain.
Yeah.
To let you see that everything is really about what's going on behind the scenes.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It is. It's Job in a nutshell for sure. But there are other places in Scripture. Take your Bibles and open up to Esther chapter 5. This aspect of the narrative of now Queen Esther significantly teaches us about this. Remember last week, Mordecai and the king of Syria at this point, Xerxes, or what's his other name? We know him. Ahasuerus. Yeah. I just want my eyes to lock on the word. I'm such a visual person. I don't know. Somebody find a verse that has his name in it for me. And you get all this going on. Mordecai, Haman is coming up in power. He's been put second in command of the kingdom. He has power. He doesn't like the fact that Mordecai won't bow to him and give him what he feels is his earned respect after all the manipulation he did to get into Xerxes' rightful, that place of authority and power and everything. And so he has it out for Mordecai and all the Jews that are throughout the land, throughout the kingdom of Syria, and all their 20-some kingdoms that exist. And so all of these things happen, and Mordecai comes to Queen Esther and sends a message. He doesn't come. He comes as far as the gate because he realizes Haman's plan to destroy Israel itself. And so he sends a messenger to Queen Esther. We talked about that last week at the end of chapter 4. And Queen Esther's like, I can't go to the king of Persia because he's going to Persia. Well, I was saying Syria. The king of Persia, because he will destroy me, and you can't go without being invited unless he holds out his scepter. But there's no guarantee he will. I haven't seen him in a while. All of these things, and Mordecai sends a message back after she says this, again going back and forth through the servant. And Mordecai says, look, whether or not you choose to do this, God will preserve his people as he's promised. He'll either do it through you or without you. Not even in spite, just through you or without you. One way or another, Mordecai's faith trusted in God's promise. So he said, but you don't know whether or not this is why you're there. You've been taken captive as a slave. You've been brought to this place of being the queen. Even though you're a Hebrew, you're now the queen in his court. Maybe this is why you're there in the first place. You didn't want to go there, but God has placed you there. And they're acknowledging that. And he uses that phrase that we all know from the book of Esther, that he has called you for such a time as this. This is why you're there. And that's where we kind of pick up the story. So let's look at chapter 5 of the book of Esther, starting in verse 1. Now it happened on the third day that Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace across from the king's house, while the king sat on his royal throne in the royal house facing the entrance of the house. And remember, Esther said to Mordecai, tell all of Israel throughout the land, for 3 days fast and pray. For 3 days, set aside the normal, everyday, I got to meet my needs things. Remember, they're under deep persecution at this point from all the proclamations that Haman put out, and at this point are getting ready to face annihilation, extermination, if you want to call it that. And so now she's looking at that. She's told Mordecai, in the midst of all of that stuff, still tell the people. We have a hard time fasting from candy bars for a week. I read a quote this morning, I don't remember what it was, but it was kind of like considering what some of the missionaries had to surrender for God in their riches, because in a sense, their riches would distract him from what God was telling them to do. And then this person said, now consider me in America, a person who drives a car, sleeps on a nice bed, has water by turning a knob in 3 or 4 rooms in his house, and can drink it all. And he goes through all this list of things that we're just used to having. I think he was talking about the rich man in the New Testament. And he goes, the rich man in the New Testament had none of those things. So what does that make me? And what is God asking me to surrender? Here Esther is asking people who not only are not wealthy in any stretch by our standards, even by the poor people in our standards, but is now asking people who are under intense persecution to purposely go without providing for themselves for 3 days so that they could focus their attention on constant prayer. And that the pangs of hunger throughout the day would remind them, oh, that's right, my focus needs to be on the prayer for what is happening now. Seeking God in the midst of persecution. So, all of that's going on. The third day, the king is sitting there facing the entrance to the house. So it was when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court that she found favor in his sight. Okay, that's the answer to the first question, right? What did she first say? I don't know if he'll kill me, because the law says I'm dead unless he holds his scepter out to me, just for being there, without even the king proclaiming it. But she found favor in his sight, and the king, verse 2, held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. So she's now safe, at least at that point. Then Esther went near and touched the top of the scepter, and the king said to her, what do you wish, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given to you up to half of the kingdom. Now, when it comes to verse 3, what stands out to you in reference to the fears that were talked about in chapter 4? What stands out to you in these first 3 verses about what is now happening with Queen Esther and the king? David? Okay. He's not only overwhelmed in a positive way with her presence, he obviously is moved by her presence, but also recognizes that there is a reason why she is here. What does that tell you about Esther in relationship to the eyes of the king? He trusted her. There's something about her that he knows she would not do this. There's a reason. She's got a purpose. Yeah. She also has influence, in part. It doesn't come across to the king that she's trying to wield that influence, but it's obvious to us now, hindsight looking back, yeah, there's some influence there for sure. Sam? She's focused, for sure. And the nation of Israel has been focused. Focused on what? When we're praying, what are we really, at least biblically, what are we supposed to be seeking? God's will, right? Because prayer is surrendering what? Self-sufficiency for God dependency. That's prayer. So for fasting for 3 days, I'm setting aside what I believe I need for my self-sufficiency physically so that I may focus on the sufficiency of God. She's done that. She's now in the presence of the king. And what stands out to me is what she feared could be the worst of what has happened is at the end of verse 3, come to realize in the setting that it is absolutely the opposite of what does happen. He not only does not have or allow her to be killed for coming into his presence without invitation, but what she receives in return is so much more than the best of what they could imagine the outcome would be. He says to her without even knowing, talk about trust. He says to her without even knowing, whatever you need, you ask me, up to the level of half of everything in the kingdom, 26 or 20-some different regions now under the Persian rule. Up to half of that will be all yours. You just say it. Whatever you need, it's yours. What an incredible level of trust. Look at verse 4. So Esther answered, if it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to the banquet that I have prepared for him. I'm like, what? Now, we all know the story. I mean, we've been around. This isn't our first rodeo through the Bible. I understand that. So we know the story, but you know, when you step back and read it as if you've never read that before, you scratch your head and think, oh, this was her chance. Just come out and tell him. Haman's a dirty dog. This is what he's doing. This is what he's done. I mean, he's already granted, yes, I will do this for you, up to half the kingdom. Well, I don't think Haman possessed more than half the kingdom. He ruled as second in command over everything. But at this point, if it was me, I'd bada boom, bada boom, bada boom, bada boom, do it to him. Get him. You know? I would be right out there. What an incredible restraint, humility, patience after this time of focusing in prayer and the entire nation as a group of people focusing that she exhibits before the king of Persia. So she said, come to a banquet. And it says a number of times through this passage, both banquets was a wine banquet. I don't know. It wasn't a wine tasting event, okay? It was something that would be something that would refresh them but present to them honor by having a wine there, because that's how they purified their water. But it was a good wine that they would present. And it was just the type of banquet that they were coming to. So it would be a complete banquet, not just, what we would consider, snacks or hors d'oeuvres or whatever. So, all right. So Esther answered, if it pleases, do that. Verse 4. Verse 5. Then the king said, bring Haman quickly, that he may do as Esther has said. So the king and Haman went to the banquet that Esther had prepared. Now Haman has not a clue who she is, other than the queen. I mean, he knows she's the queen. At the banquet of the wine, the king said to Esther, what is now your petition? Now I'm thinking to myself, she already asked. He offered her anything up to half of the kingdom, and she says, all I want you to do is come to a banquet. Well, the king obviously doesn't accept that as the request. He just accepts that as an invitation, thinking, okay, this is not the setting in which he wants to ask. However he wants to look at that, or it's not significant enough of a request, whatever it is, he still wants her to know that he is willing now to give her everything up to half. So, at the banquet of the wine, the king said to her, do that. What is your petition? It shall be granted to you. What is your request? Up to half the kingdom, and it shall be done. Now, this is in the presence of Haman. Then Esther answered and said, my petition and request is this. If I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, then let the king and Haman come to the banquet which I will prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do as the king has said. Verse 8, if it pleases you, king, have you and Haman come back for another banquet. And it, again, the second banquet even talked about it being a wine banquet. Some kind of put in it an emphasis and a difference between the two banquets. I don't see that in the text. It may in fact have happened, but tomorrow I'll do as the king has said, and I'll grant you my request. Can you just do this one more time? We don't know why Esther asked this and approached it this way. We don't. There's nowhere in the text that tells us this. We have to assume after 3 days of fasting and praying that this is what God was leading her to do. Well, let's read a minute, because then I have a question for you, and I didn't want to spill the beans. Spoiler alert. All right, so verse 9. So Haman went out that day joyful and with a glad heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, and that he did not stand or tremble before him, he was filled with indignation against Mordecai. I can see him just pull out his hair like, what? I just came from meeting with the king and queen personally. I'm the only one there. I was the only one asked to come. I got to sit with the king and the queen. I heard all of this going back and forth in a personal relationship between the king and the queen, and I was part of it. And Mordecai still, what is the matter with this guy? He's just enraged. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home. That's great restraint. And he sent and called for his friends and his wife, Zeresh. We know from the story, not really good counselors, but Haman told them of the great riches, the multitude of his children, everything in which the king has promoted him to, and he advanced him above the officials and servants of the king. Moreover, Haman said, besides, Queen Esther invited no one but me to come with the king to the banquet that she prepared. And tomorrow I am again invited by her along with the king. And he's all puffed up and he's all promoted. Talk about Queen Esther's restraint. She knows his plan. She didn't let on, and she served him. Again, I don't know why. We don't know why. We don't know what was going on through her thinking. The only thing we can do is give God credit for this. She had no idea what was going to happen. Let's read this. Verse 13, yet all this avails me nothing so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting in the king's gate. He has wealth, position, power, influence, respect. He has control over all of the officials in the land. He is in the king and queen's personal presence in a casual setting, which just didn't happen very often for anybody with the king of Persia. And yet, simply because Mordecai and the Jews wouldn't bow to him, he's just, all of this is worth nothing if I can't get them to bow to me. He just can't stand that there's anybody that won't give him what he feels he's due. I said that way for a reason. We all go through life, don't we? Thinking in terms of what we deserve. And in America, we're really good at that. We deserve to have a car or two. We deserve to own our own home. Anyways, we deserve to have children. We deserve to be happy. We deserve to have joy. We deserve to have this or to have that. The list just goes on and on. We deserve to have this kind of job, that kind of job. We deserve to go to this kind of school, that kind of school. We deserve to, and we just go. We have that idea so ingrained so deeply in us that sometimes we're just as bad as Mordecai. Lord, all that I do have is worth nothing if I just can't have this. And none of us, in reality, none of us ever come out and say that in prayer. Right? But I can't tell you that I have gone through life without feeling that way at times. I just deserve this moment of rest, moment of peace, moment of joy, moment of happiness, moment of contentment. What job, God, I deserve to be not as fat as I am. Whatever it is. I should be able to eat this without gaining 2 pounds. Come on. Right? So many times we are really quick to put down Haman. And it's kind of the beam splinter thing, I think a little bit. Maybe not to the level of wanting to murder an entire race of people, okay? I mean, if we're going to qualify this, okay, Haman is what Haman is. But sometimes we're not quite as bad as this. So verse 14, then his wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, let a gallows be made 50 cubits high, and in the morning suggest to the king that Mordecai be hanged on it. Then go merrily with the king to the banquet. And the thing pleased Haman, so he had the gallows made. Finally, I'm going to put this to rest. He'll either bow to me or dangle. Wow. Now, if we were to read, and I'm probably getting ahead to next week's lesson, so maybe I'll do this as the cliffhanger. If we were to read ahead, we know that night, when Haman goes back and talks to his wife and does all of his pouting and has his pity party, and his counselors give him something physical to do to make him feel better, go have them build this place to hang, okay? The gallows. Just get yourself busy so that you can take care of the problem tomorrow. Let's just put this to rest once and for all. While he's doing that, the king of Persia, who is in control of everything at this point, we find out goes back sleepless. Can't sleep. Now, all he did was have a banquet with Esther. Enjoyed it. There's still a request that's hanging out there that she hasn't given. I don't think that he's stirring in the sense of worrying about what she's going to ask for, maybe wondering a little bit, but a banquet to look forward to tomorrow. But he goes back in chapter 6, and he's sleepless all night. And he gives charge to the eunuchs that serve him. I want you to go. I want you to bring me all the legal documents. I just want to read about all the things that have happened, all the records. And he reads about what Mordecai did in saving his life earlier in the book of Esther. And he asked the question to the eunuch, what has been done to honor this man? And the eunuch says nothing. Here's the question. Did Esther know that the king was going to do that night? No. So I scratch my head. Why did she set it up this way? I mean, it fits perfectly with what happened, doesn't it? I have no clue. And anybody that tells you they know why, they have no clue. They just think they know. We have no clue from Scripture. We can look at all of the cultural things that were going on in the day, all the historical context of what was going on within the Persian kingdom at that point, and King Xerxes, Ahasuerus, whatever his name is. Yeah, Ahasuerus. Okay. Yeah, because nobody told me what verse to find his name. 3:1. Okay, 3:1. There you go. King Ahasuerus. All right, Xerxes. Okay. So, all right, we know all of those things that are going on. There's nothing in all of that context that tells us why she set up the banquets this way. It can tell us what the banquets were like. It can tell us why no one could come into the presence of the king without fearing for their lives if they weren't invited. We can find out all that stuff, but there is nothing that tells us why Esther did things the way she did.
But it is under the framework of fasting and prayer.
That's the key. We can, biblically, look at this and say there's no way, humanly speaking, she could have known. But it's all seated in a focused, heartfelt, physically reminding context of seeking God's will. God, what do you have for me in this? What do you have for me in this? Now, she gets an answer. Job never did in this lifetime. He never got the answer as to why God allowed all those things to happen. At least, it's not recorded for us. But here, Esther never does. So, do me a favor, just read chapter 6 this week. We'll come back next week and talk about it. All right? Let's close in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father,